joining me. I'm here with Coach Ted again, and we're going to talk about jerkbaits today, Ted.
Jerkbaits.
Yeah. We're going to talk about how to modify them so that they can cover largemouth in 2 feet of water to 10 feet of water, stripers, anything you want to do, that jerkbait will do it, and it'll cover it year round. And I can tell you, Ted and I have been spending a lot of time together. I mean, on the water, okay? I mean, cross your fingers right now because we've had some pretty darn good luck.
Yeah.
We've got good numbers and we've got some big fish, over 5 pounds, on almost every trip. If it wasn't a 5-pounder, it was right there at 5. The one constant is a jerkbait. 2 feet of water, 10 feet of water, north, south, in between. So we're going to go over the jerkbaits that we like to use. Ted's going to talk about his modifications. I'll give you some of my favorite jerkbaits that I like to use. And I think we should maybe start off, Ted, by talking about the rod you use. And I'll give them a few suggestions on what I use. So let's start off with the rod that you like to use for jerkbaits for largemouth bass.
Sure. Because I fish really aggressively, and you've seen me, I mean, we probably have it on video. I snap hard in the fall when I'm searching for aggressive fish. I want a rod with some give in it, so I fish a medium, fast action glass rod.
And that's the Dobbins?
Right now it's a Dobbins rod. I've fished a lot of other ones in the past. I really like the Dobbins rod I'm fishing now. But yeah, it's got a real good soft tip. I can snap the bait out there, and it's got enough backbone to fight a big fish even if they get down in the weeds.
And how about your reel and your line setup?
I'm throwing right now a Daiwa Tatula. It's got that wing that opens up so you have less resistance. I believe it's a 7-1 gear ratio. 7-1. And I'm fishing usually in the fall 12-pound fluorocarbon lines.
Straight fluorocarbon. And you're going to notice, you know, pretty standard what Ted's throwing. It's pretty standard what I'm throwing also. But two ridiculously far apart philosophies. I'm throwing shorter rods. I'm also throwing a Tatula rod. And I like to throw a shorter rod. I can even go down to a 6'10" or a 7-foot rod, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. As you watch some of the video that we have of catching fish, you're going to see, Ted said he's very aggressive. You're going to see him working that bait hard and aggressive. I'm a little bit more laid back with just a twitch and pause, and I'll tell you, in the last couple weeks, there have been days when every fish that I have on camera, I caught. Big ones, over 3 pounds. 2 days later, I think we were down in Victoria. I think every fish that we caught over 2 or 3 pounds, you caught. Yeah. And it's, you know, there's no right or wrong way here. I will say this, Ted, I want you to talk a little bit right now because I've got a rod over there, and I want to talk about not only the rod that you use, but why I use these short rods, and I want to talk about how I hold the rod and reel. So, give me a little time here. You're supposed to be talking, Ted.
Oh, well, I didn't know I was supposed to be talking.
All right.
I'll pick up after you talk about the rod.
I'm back already. So this is one of my favorite jerkbait rods, and it's a Tatula. This is a 7-foot, and it is a medium, what is this? Medium, can you read that?
I think it's just a medium rod.
It's medium. It's not medium heavy. It's not medium light. But it is a light rod. Now, the reason, this is a 7-foot rod. I also have some 6'10" rods. The reason I like those shorter rods is because I think when you are on a boat, I see a lot of guys that are holding the rod in the wrong position when they're twitching the bait or ripping the bait. You have to have that rod tip down near the water. If you have the rod up here and you're jerking it like it's a popper, or you know you're sidearm jerking it, you're going to give that bait a totally different action. I like to have that rod, and I know you guys will have a hard time seeing this, down in this position, not up here, but when I'm fishing, I like to have it down, and as I'm twitching that rod, I like to have that rod tip within 6 inches of the surface of the water. That gives me really good contact, and it gives me that good erratic motion. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is I see, especially beginners, and we have the thumb finger or the trigger grip here. A lot of guys will hold the rod below that trigger grip. I would highly recommend holding one finger in front of that. See what we have here? And also when you're using a jerkbait, your wrist is going to, whether you're really ripping it or whether you are just mildly twitching it, your wrist is going to take a lot of pounding. So I will go from that to a two-handed, two fingers in front of that pistol grip. The other thing that I'll do is, I don't care what reel it is, but I do use a smaller reel. This is a 150 reel. The reason being is that if I'm using this grip here, I can thumb the reel like this. If I put two fingers in front of it, or even three fingers in front of it, I can palm that whole reel. And that gives me a little different action on my wrist and on my elbow, so that if I'm starting to get fatigued, I can change the grip of my rod and reel. The other thing I'll say is that, let me put this down.
Well, I think first of all, I mean, you're giving away a key piece of advice there, regardless of, you're throwing a tatular rod, I'm using a tatular reel. My reel is very low profile. And that's the same reason to get your hand, you can move it around all day long as you're working that.
And everybody's got a different size hand. I highly recommend try to keep that twitch down low to the water and switch around with how you're holding your rod and reel. Just try different things. Also, in the wintertime, if I'm doing this all day long, where I might be running a jerkbait and I might be fishing stripers for 20 minutes and largemouth bass for 20 minutes, and I've got 2 or 3 rods, I'll always have a spinning rod. Spinning rods are excellent jerkbait rods, and you know, with that parabolic bend, they don't put as much on. You know, it's not like you're jarring your wrist and your arm all day. So think about that. There's no, you know, I would just say, I guess there is a wrong rod to use. You don't want a super stiff rod on these things.
You don't want a telephone pole.
Yeah, and when you, a fast action rod, a stiff fast action rod, you're going to find that you're going to lose a lot of fish, because as these things come up and take the jerkbaits, a lot of times they're taking them just a couple of feet underwater and they tend to jump a lot more, almost like a topwater. They've got those treble hooks and they're shaking their head. With a rod that's too stiff, it's not going to give. It's not going to be forgiving enough, so that when that fish starts shaking his head, and I'll tell you, you lost a big one. Yeah. I got that on tape, and we'll probably, I don't know if we'll put it on today.
You can put it on. That was 100% my fault, because I thought it was a small fish and I was just skiing it in.
Yeah, and you have to fight these fish a little different. So think about the rod and reel combinations that you use. I didn't talk about the line that I use, but I use about 30 or 40 pound test braid, and I use about 4 to 6 feet of leader. I very seldom use fluoro. I'm basically a mono guy. If I want to get a little deeper, I will switch out to fluoro, but generally I really like the limpness of the mono, so that that bait gets the action. So with that, let's talk about some baits. And the first bait that I want to talk about, because it's a bait both you and I can agree on, is the Berkley Stunna. Yep. It's about $16, and this is a bait that it's a very well-made bait for Berkley. Geez, I've got probably 30 or 40 fish on this. I use them straight out of the box with the regular hooks, and Ted is going to talk about some of the modifications that he uses on this, and I've seen him do very well with these modifications. So I'll just say that straight out of the box, you can use them with the hooks that they come with. They're very durable, they have good action, and they have a neutral buoyancy, so you work them down to a certain depth, and I guess straight out of the box they'll work down to about 6 or 8 feet. Now Ted's going to talk about how a modification that he does right now to change the color, and he's going to change the hooks on them, and that allows him to get this Stunna down to probably 2 to 4 feet deeper, and again, if you're using fluorocarbon line, you may even get 5 or 6 feet deeper. That puts you anywhere you need to be in the delta 99% of the time for either bass or stripers. My suggestion would be, if you buy 2 of them, make some of these modifications that Ted's going to talk about, leave one straight out of the box, see how you like it, and then go from there. So Ted, tell them what you do with the
Stunna. Yeah, let's talk. If you don't mind, let's take one step back as we lead into this, and let's talk about why we're doing this. Right, fall, water temps dropping. These fish are actively feeding. We talk about working these baits super aggressive because we're trying to trigger a strike. So for me, because we're trying to trigger a strike, I'm trying to imitate the predominant bait fish that are out there in the system right now, which are shad.
And remember, you're bringing this up. This is the versatility of the jerkbait, and what you're gonna see now is the total versatility of one jerkbait from 2 feet deep to, I'll say, 12 feet deep.
So I'm trying to imitate the shad pattern, what in the system in the fall, it's what these bass are gorging on. So I use a Berkley Stunna, and I'm going to show you, and we have a picture I think you can flash up on the screen. That's what this Stunna looks like out of the box, whether this is a +1. I usually don't throw a +1, but I haven't modified it yet. Notice how shiny it is. This is one of the modified baits I've made. And what I've done is I've taken all that shiny paint off the side. I've left the black back and the color from the gill plates back. But I've taken all that shiny paint off and made it a very matte colored lure. That's modification number 1. Modification number 2 is I throw a little red paint behind the gill plates just to give the bass a target.
In case they didn't see that.
Right.
Modified, non-modified.
Yeah. And then I have a little disagreement with you on the Stunna hooks. I don't like them out of the box. I've lost too many fish on them in past years. I always change my hooks, and I upsize them. So for me, I put on, for this Stunna, I want it to go from neutrally buoyant to slightly sinking. So I do that by putting on a set of Owner 2X strong trebles in size 4 on the front hook and middle hook. And then in the back, put a size 4 feathered hook.
And go over that one more time, Ted, because I'm not going to take the time to put all this in the comments, but so I want you to go over that again. So if somebody wants to know the size and the model hook you're putting on,
Owner treble, 2 times strong, in size 4 for the front and middle hooks. Front and middle. And then on the very back, I put a size 4 feathered trailer. And I replaced the split rings with hyper wire size 3.
Size 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now I have a jerkbait that can comfortably handle an 8, 9, 10 pound bass without bending the hooks out.
And that's your 2X size hook.
That's yes.
Now, the other day we were out fishing stripers, and I had a re-range on, which is a big bait, and we'll talk about this bait in just a minute. I was catching fish. You caught fish for a longer period of time. After those fish got excited when they were up, we were both catching fish. As those fish dissipated and they started dropping down, you continued to catch fish. And I thought you said you had 3X heavy hooks. And I looked at your bait, and I could see those heavy hooks, and I could see why that bait was getting down maybe 4, 5, 6 feet deeper than my bait was.
Yeah.
Talk about the 3X heavy when you're fishing.
That's a striper modification.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So when I'm throwing it for stripers, I even upsize my hooks 1 size larger. Now they're 3X hooks. They're still
1 size larger or 1 size heavier.
1 size heavier.
Okay.
They're 3X hooks. They're still size 4s, but they're 3X strong hooks. They just give me a little bit more weight. And the other thing is, when we were casting out there, I was counting that thing down for 5 seconds before I then started working it. And I, like you, changed the depth of my bait in the water column by where my rod tip is. If I'm fishing bass over weeds, a lot of times my rod tip is a little higher. If I'm fishing stripers and trying to get down 8, 10 feet, number one, I have the fluorocarbon line, which lets me get a little deeper, and then my rod tip is down at the water's edge. So I'm working that deeper.
And you know, after you get down past what that Stunna will do with the depth that the Stunna will reach with the 3X heavy hooks, that's when you might want to switch over to just a fish trap or something like that with maybe a 1/2 ounce head if you've got to get down there 15 to 20, 25 feet deep. But once again, we have a Berkley Stunna out of the box. That's one way to fish it. You can modify it with the 2X hooks like Ted was, and you're going to get that bait down just a little deeper. That's your second option on the Stunna. The third option would be with those 3X heavy hooks. Now you've got a striper bait. So I told you you should buy 2 Stunnas, and I don't care what bait you're buying or what brand, but if you're looking for versatility, you don't have to buy 5 or 6 brands. You can buy a Stunna, you can buy a Mega Bass, you can buy a Jackall, whatever you want. But by changing the hooks and the size of the hooks and the weight of the hooks, you can have that one bait. Especially if it's a bait that you like to throw, it's the right size, it's the right color, you just have, you have good luck on it, then you can go ahead and take that bait and modify it to get down deeper and modify it to catch stripers on. Now, being that we're talking about stripers a little bit, here's another one. I've got this re-range. Yeah. I believe this is from Jackall. I really like this bait for stripers. And the reason that I like this bait, it comes with a good saltwater hook on it. Now, if you're a hardcore guy and you're trying to catch fish over 12, 15, 18 pounds, you may want to change the hook on this. But for 5 to 8 pound fish on the Delta, this re-range is awesome. One of the things that I like about this, it has a weight transfer system, and you can't hear it. But when we were fishing the other day, Ted kept ducking because he thought somebody was shooting at us. When you're using this bait, that weight transfer system, when you put the steam to it to cast it, it will snap, it'll crack, and you'll think you've busted your rod. It'll just give you a huge snap. What that's doing is the weight's transferring and pushing that bait out. I can cast this a mile striper. I highly recommend this re-range. Keep the standard hooks on it, and you start catching bigger fish, you bend them out. And this is, I think, a 5 1/4 inch bait. It's a little bigger. Yeah. Does the Stunna come in a bigger size?
I don't know.
That's a Stunna, and that's the re-range. So those are 2 baits that you can have. And again, the advantage of this guy here, it does get deeper, but you can cast it a mile, and it's got some pretty darn good hooks on, and it really will take an aggressive striper type retrieve where you're just really pounding that bait back. So that's a couple of the baits that we use. Do you have another bait you wanted to talk about, or?
No, and you were talking about getting deeper with that, and that's why this +1.
Yeah,
I've got several of the +1s in my box that have the same modification, and with the bigger hooks because they're for stripers. That's the one thing about the Stunna is its skeleton holds up really well to abuse. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can land a 15-pound striper on a Berkley Stunna. I just make the same modification, except for I use the stronger hooks.
We both hit rocks with those, and they're still there. And yeah, you may bend out the hooks, you may have to change the split rings, but the body of that bait is really tough. Now, another thing that I'm not going to talk about today, but it's something that I've been experimenting with, is on all of these baits. Some of you may have heard of a soft split ring, and that's a split ring that is tied out of either paracord or 30 to 50 pound braid. I've been experimenting with that, and I'm going to wait to do another video, but I have been using that soft split ring, and so far I really like it. I don't lose as many fish, and the deal is when you have that I'll say 30 pound braid that you have the hook tied on with instead of a split ring, it gives the hook all kind of room to move around, so that when you get these fish, especially bigger fish that come up and jump, the split ring will tend to work as kind of a crowbar against that thing, and that's how some of the hooks pop out. But that will be on another video. We failed to talk about the Mega Bass Vision 110, and these are great baits. Everybody has them. The problem is everybody's getting tired of paying $26 for them, and then the first thing on these, the first thing you better do, unless you're fishing in a lake that commonly doesn't get fish over 2 or 3 pounds. If you're fishing on the Delta and they're striper and big bass, you've got to change those hooks out. And 3 treble hooks with 3 new split rings is another $6. Yeah, you got $30 into this bait, and I'll tell you what, I went through, I think 4 of these with the lips breaking off. Yeah. So just, you don't have to have these Vision 110s, and I'm not downgrading because I love fishing them. I just don't like buying them.
They're the best winter jerk bait in the Delta. I throw the Vision 110 that's in the what they call the matte shad during the winter, But yeah, you're absolutely right. Not Delta friendly, because if you hit a rock, you'll bust off the bill, and you have to replace the hooks. And you have to be careful in replacing the hooks in the split rings, because you completely change the performance of that bait if you don't put something on that's pretty much exactly the same way.
Right.
So, and there's no question. I mean, that's the Ferrari of jerk baits when handled right.
One other thing that we'll talk about is this pointer. That is another really good bait, and it's a little more compact. And one of the things you'll notice on this, it only has 2 hooks. So I think that is a bonus. A lot of times, especially when you're catching smaller fish, when you have 3 hooks, one of the downsides of a jerkbait is you unhook one, the fish kind of shakes his head a little bit, and then you got one in the side. You get that one, and then you got the 3rd one in the gill,
or in your finger.
Or in your finger. Yeah. So that's another one. The pointer is about a $15 bait, extremely versatile bait. You don't need anything else in what we've talked about.
Well, I want to circle back to what we talked about, because we talked about it in a Senko video like 2 years ago.
Okay.
And we touched on it earlier in this video. Nothing in nature is really shiny underwater. Mm-hmm. And I'll go back to my 2 big baits are this modified Stunna, and in the wintertime, a matte shad color. And you pick up that pointer and you look at it, and what's the first thing? It's almost a translucent, right?
It's not shiny.
It's not shiny. I think there's times that shiny works, muddy water, right? Clarity's low, you're fighting to get fish's attention. There's a niche for those things. But on the Delta, in the fall, when we get pretty clear water, I think translucent things that look like the bait fish that are in the water are the way to go. I think when you're working those hard and erratic, and the soft rod is important for the erraticness, because if you see me working a jerkbait, which I think you've got the video of, right? You're thinking that guy's a madman. But that soft rod, that glass is absorbing it, and what it's doing is that jerkbait underwater is actually making short turns, right, in front of those fish, whereas if it was a hard rod, you'd just be jerking that thing back to the boat. But those fish have to react. It's instinctual that they see this thing acting like a wounded bait fish, and I think the more it looks like nature, the more you're going to get those aggressive fish.
Yeah, and I want to get back to this retrieve, too, before we go. That'll be the final thing. But I've noticed one thing. When we talked about the Stunna, this is not... I got one of these when they first came out, and I think I had to get this color because that's the only color I could get. And I started catching fish right off the bat on this thing. And if you notice, it's got a bright orange belly. I don't know why, but don't be afraid to color up a jerkbait or buy a jerkbait in a crawdad color, because these things will represent crawdad too. My buddy Kenny Vang over at Kenny's Out Fishing, check out his YouTube. He consistently throws crawdad colored jerkbaits, trying to represent a crawdad rather than a square bill or another more popular bait, and he catches a lot of fish on it. Because remember, crawdads are very sporadic when they are moving through vegetation. They're bam, bam, bam. They move real quick. Now, when they're at rest, they stop very abruptly. But when they take off like a shotgun. With that being said, we talked about vegetation. One of the absolute biggest mistakes that people make is fishing these, not fishing them through heavy enough vegetation. And don't throw them where you're going to throw a frog. Throw them where you would throw a crankbait or a chatterbait, maybe in a little more open water, but in that same type of sparse vegetation. The biggest problem is they'll be tapping that thing, and then all of a sudden they'll feel it's hung up on some LED or something. And the first thing you do is bam, you try to rip that thing off. Totally wrong thing to do. When you are bringing that back and you feel something on there, you don't want to rip it off of the vegetation. You want to point the rod tip right at the vegetation and use your reel to pop it off like this, just to pop with the reel handle, and you'll find 80% of the time that bait will come right through it and it'll be clean. You'll also find that as it pops through there, if you don't do this and the bait comes 3 feet away from the vegetation or whatever you're in there, if it just kind of pops through 6 inches and stays there, that's when you get the bite. And so many times in the back of the boat, I'll hear a guy, I'm hung up, and I'm seeing him back there and he's doing this, and oh, I just got it out. Oh, I got a fish. And you'll also notice that when it breaks off the vegetation, you'll see a puff of, we're going to call it dust. It's kind of a mud that gets on the submerged vegetation at low tide, and as you're throwing anything through it, you know it. It kind of gives you that ball of mud ball or something. Well, fish cue in on that because that could be a bluegill popping through there. It could be a split tail. It could be any type of bait fish. It could be a crawdad. So when you touch something and you're in that situation, if you can just pop your reel and get it to come out and stop, that is important. And I also think the reason that I'm not this guy doing this is I do not want that bait to move more than this much. If I can just do it like this and stop, and like this and stop, that's all I need. I tried to really, a lot of times I'll do a lot of underhand pitching with these things, or sidearm. I never throw I'll throw this re-range overhead, but generally I want to keep these baits close to the water. And if I find a hole that's maybe the size of this desk, if I can get that jerkbait in there at the right cast, and I can just twitch it 3, 4, 5 times, and it's not going to come out of the strike zone, that's all I need. Once I twitch, if I don't get anything, I pull it out, almost like a popper. I'll give you a general rule that I use. If it's flat calm, no wind, you don't have a lot of current, you've got fairly clear water, you want to make a long cast as far as you can. You want to fish a little deeper on the edges of the vegetation, and you want to longer pauses and just much more finesse, just tiny little twitches. You get out there and the wind's blowing 15 or 20, you've got a good strong tide, maybe you've got 3, 4 feet of visibility, then I might start with a real aggressive pop or jerk or rip. Your style of fishing may be like Ted's. You just can't do this all day long. It's like fishing a worm. But you know, Ted catches fish with his style because it's super aggressive. He probably covers more water. He's looking for those fish that are real aggressive at the time, and that's going to work a lot of times. But just try to be as versatile as you can with your retrieves. The other thing people don't do, Ted, is, especially when I'm fishing striper, I like to make that long cast, say on the re-range, and I just reel them in real quick, 4 or 5 reels. Bap, 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 stop it, bap, bap, bap. Once you get a striper on there, he's going to follow that thing 3 or 4 times. Sometimes the worst thing you can do for stripers is bap, 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 you get a bite and you want to stop it. Just keep it going. Keep it going, stop it, start it, but move it fast. Any last words of wisdom, Ted?
Well, I think you've given a lot of great information here. I want to give a little piece of Delta-specific information because you've talked about pulling through the weeds.
You know, these are the fish we're fishing for.
Yeah, I realize it, but I don't want everybody to catch them. The other day when we were fishing, we were specifically fishing at low tide, a little bit of incoming just starting, and we were targeting a shelf where the weeds at the mud line were in 1.5 foot of water, and then it dropped down into 10, 12 feet. And we were casting on purpose into that 1.5 foot of water, ripping through those weeds, and then letting our baits come down that shelf.
On that particular day, they were healthy, and we could jerk those baits through there without nothing being on. If we had been in a different area where there's witches here, we couldn't have done that. So,
but this is the Delta, and these fish set up, face into the tide, looking up with that tide coming, and we were making long casts into the edge of the weeds, dropping right to where those fish were sitting there looking. And I know a lot of people, when they talk about it's low tide on the Delta, fishing gets tough. If you know where to go get these fish, actually low tide can move them into a smaller pool, and you can target them with jerkbaits. Fall time jerkbaits for these aggressive bass at low tides really become fun. Just don't be afraid to get a little grassy.
So, Ted, thanks for sharing your information. And hopefully the next time we go, I'm going to be the guy catching fish, and you're going to be watching me. But until then, we're both going to have fun. Hope you guys get out on the river, start catching some fish. Man, get out there. I think the next 3 weeks are going to be great, and they're going to be great for jerkbait fishing. So thank you guys for watching. We will see you on the river.